It says, this person is important. I need to pay attention. I need to understand what's happening here. It triggers the very mechanism in the brain responsible for emotional addiction. That's why people don't become obsessed with those who are always available. They become obsessed with those who create emotional tension, a push and pull dynamic that keeps their mind active and emotionally engaged. But let's be very clear. This is not about games or manipulation. Emotional contrast isn't about playing with someone's heart irresponsibly. It's about awareness. If your energy is always on, always giving, always comforting, you become emotionally flat, predictable, and in that predictability, you lose depth. You stop being a mystery, and without mystery, there's no tension, no reason for the mind to obsess. You become safe and often, unfortunately, forgettable. On the flip side, when you begin to modulate your emotional presence, sometimes being completely available, open, intense, and other times stepping back, being reserved, being calm, even slightly elusive, you create a contrast that activates deeper emotional pathways. You're no longer a one-note melody. You're a symphony of emotion, and it's that emotional complexity that makes you unforgettable. Let's take it further. Emotionally, women are far more attuned to these subtle shifts than men realize. They pick up on tone, on energy, on the rhythm of your presence. And if you're always showing up with the same emotional frequency, it doesn't matter how kind or attractive you are eventually, she stops feeling you. But when your emotional presence evolves, when you can switch from depth to lightness, from being deeply interested to momentarily unavailable, you create a space for her to chase, to wonder, to imagine. And that space, that's where desire lives. Think of emotional contrast like seasoning in food. Without it, even the most expensive ingredients taste bland, but the right mix of salt and spice wakes up the senses. Similarly, emotional contrast wakes up a woman's emotional attention. It makes her more aware of your presence, more impacted by your absence, and it's that awareness that plants the seeds of obsession. Now, this isn't about being hot one day and cold the next. That's instability, and that creates insecurity, not attraction. Emotional contrast isn't about being inconsistent in your character. It's about being dynamic in your emotional expression. You can be the same grounded, secure man, but you express yourself in layered ways. Some days you're playful and teasing, other days thoughtful and quiet. Sometimes you're intensely affectionate, other times you're purpose, driven and slightly distant. Each of these emotional colors paints a deeper image of who you are, and each shift makes her feel like there's more to discover about you. That's what hooks the female psyche, depth, not just charm. But here's where it gets interesting. The more a woman feels emotionally stimulated by you, the more she assigns meaning to her feelings. She begins to interpret her emotional reactions as signs that you're special, that this connection is rare. That you are rare, that's the real secret. It's not about what you say. It's about what you make her feel when she's around you and when you're not. Emotional contrast makes her reflect, question, imagine. And that mental engagement becomes emotional attachment. When done right, emotional contrast leads to one of the most potent forms of attraction, psychological imprinting. Her brain starts to tie strong emotional moments, highs and lows, to you. And once you become the emotional reference point for intensity, for connection, for longing, it's almost impossible for her to not be drawn back to you again and again. This isn't magic, it's psychology. It's understanding that love doesn't thrive in emotional monotony. It thrives in rhythm, in mystery, in the careful interplay between certainty and curiosity. And when you master emotional contrast, not as a tactic, but as a deeper understanding of how the human mind attaches, you become more than just a man. You become an experience, and experiences are what women fall in love with. So if you truly want to make a woman love you, not just like you, not just want you, but deeply, madly love you, stop trying to always be nice or available. Start becoming emotionally memorable. Give her something to feel. Something to miss, something to chase. When we talk about making a woman love you, not just temporarily desire you, but truly connect with you, most people get it wrong. They think love comes from saying the right things, impressing her with confidence, maybe even offering stability and affection. And sure, those things help, but they're not the core. The real key lies in something far more subtle, far more powerful, mirroring her core desires, not just her words, because here's the thing. People don't fall in love with facts. They fall in love with reflections of themselves, not their conscious self, the one they show to the world, but the emotional self that hides beneath the surface, the self that's scared, the self that's dreaming. The self that craves to be seen without having to explain. That's where the magic happens. That's where attachment begins, and very few men know how to reach that level of intimacy. Most men respond to what a woman says. But dark psychology understands that what she says isn't always what she means. Not because she's being deceptive, but because, like all of us, she's driven by emotional needs she can't always articulate. So while she may say she wants a man who's kind or successful, what she may actually be longing for is a man who makes her feel safe being vulnerable, or a man who validates her sense of purpose, her femininity, her hidden need to be chosen without condition. This is where mirroring becomes psychological seduction, not manipulation, but a deeply attuned form of emotional intelligence. You have to listen not with your ears, but with your intuition. What is she really saying when she tells you about her past? What is she feeling when she tells you she's independent? Is that strength? Or is it self-protection? Is it pride? Or is it fear of being disappointed again? The man who can sense that unspoken emotional current and mirror it back, not with flattery, but with recognition, is the man who unlocks something primal in her. He becomes the mirror she never knew she needed. And once a woman sees her emotional self in you, once she feels like you get her in a way no one else does, her guard lowers, her connection deepens, her love begins to root itself in you. But let's clarify, this isn't about becoming a chameleon. You don't just copy what she wants or pretend to be something you're not. That's shallow, that's fragile. Instead, it's about being attuned enough to know which parts of your authentic self resonate with her subconscious identity. It's about aligning your presence with her emotional truth. For example, if you sense she's someone who's been constantly overlooked, always performing for attention, you don't just compliment her beauty. You affirm her value when she's not performing. You make her feel chosen when she's unpolished, when she's soft, when she's scared. That tells her, this man sees more than my mask, he sees me. Or maybe she carries herself like a high achiever, always in control, always ambitious. But beneath that, you sense exhaustion, a hidden wish to let go, to be led for once, to feel rather than think. So instead of challenging her intellect to prove your worth, you show her your emotional strength. Your calm, your ability to lead gently without control, and in doing so, you awaken a softer, almost sacred part of her femininity, the part that longs to rest in someone else's certainty. That's the power of emotional mirroring. You reflect not who she pretends to be, but who she secretly hopes to be around the right man. This is the difference between chemistry and connection. Chemistry is instant. It's dopamine and attraction and maybe even lust. But connection, that's about reflection. It's about resonance. It's about feeling emotionally understood without needing to speak. And it's that resonance that builds psychological bonding. Once that bond is formed, it's not just love, it's devotion. Now, from a dark psychology standpoint, this mirroring process also creates something called emotional anchoring. When you become the one who reflects her emotional identity, especially the parts she doesn't share with anyone else, her brain begins to associate you with her sense of self. You become a mirror, a container, and a catalyst. She doesn't just feel love for you, she feels more herself around you, and that kind of love that's almost impossible to let go of. But let's be honest, most men never get here. They stay on the surface, they try to impress, or they try to dominate, or they try to give her everything she asks for without ever realizing that she doesn't want a servant. She wants a mirror, a man who sees her soul and reflects it back to her with strength, not desperation, with presence, not performance. So if you really want to use dark psychology to make a woman fall in love, you have to go beneath the obvious, beneath the scripts, beneath the compliments, beneath even the right moves. You have to become emotionally intelligent enough to see who she is when no one's watching, and then love that part of her in ways she didn't think were possible. And when you do, you'll find that love is no longer something you chase. It becomes something that chases you. Let's pull back the curtain on something that's quietly running the show behind most romantic desire, something that rarely gets talked about in real terms: scarcity. Not material scarcity, not absence for the sake of playing hard to get. I'm talking about psychological scarcity, the perception that your presence, your attention, your emotional energy is valuable because it is not constantly available. You see, we live in a world that's conditioned us to believe that more is always better. More attention, more compliments, more access. So what happens? Most men, especially when they're deeply interested in a woman, overgive. They flood her with validation. They answer every message in seconds. They express their desire too soon. And while their intentions may be pure, the effect is almost always the same. They lower their perceived value. The human brain is wired to assign value to what is scarce, not what is abundant. When something is too easily accessible, it's not just taken for granted. It's subconsciously seen as less desirable. And this is where most men misunderstand the psychology of attraction. They believe that availability equals love, that effort always equals results, but in reality, it's strategic self-control, the ability to withhold, to wait, to create space, that activates the part of a woman's mind responsible for intrigue and pursuit. Think about this. The most addictive stories, the most fascinating people, the most powerful emotional experiences, they all share one thing: tension, space, a sense that something is just beyond reach. And that distance creates longing. That longing sharpens focus. When something can't be fully accessed right away, it becomes an emotional puzzle, something the mind turns over again and again, trying to solve. That's the birthplace of obsession. When you become a man who could offer more affection, more presence, more intimacy, but chooses not to give it all at once, you become psychologically scarce. You show self-restraint. You create the impression that your energy is selective, that your love is not something handed out indiscriminately, but something earned over time, and in doing so, you reverse the emotional dynamic. Instead of you chasing her attention, she starts chasing your validation. But again, let's be clear. This isn't about playing cold or emotionally unavailable. That's not power. That's fear disguised as control. True psychological scarcity doesn't mean being distant. It means being intentional. It's the difference between being emotionally chaotic and being emotionally measured. You're not withholding love because you're afraid. You're doing it because you understand that emotional investment must be mutual, not one-sided, and the more discipline you show in pacing your energy, the more respect you create. She begins to sense that your validation isn't something she can manipulate or demand. It's something she must earn. And that makes it worth more, because people always value what they have to invest in emotionally. Always. There's another layer here that goes even deeper. When you control your impulses, when you don't text her back instantly, when you don't always jump at the chance to please her, when you let silence stretch out and become part of the rhythm, you're demonstrating a high level of emotional mastery. You're signaling that you are not governed by emotional hunger or approval, seeking behavior. You're calm, composed, centered, and this calmness creates trust, safety, mystery. Women are incredibly sensitive to energy. When a man is overly eager, constantly available, or emotionally needy, it creates an energetic imbalance. He becomes too predictable, too easy to read, and while that may feel safe in the short term, it does not create desire. What creates desire is polarity, emotional difference, the sense that she's stepping into something deeper, something not fully in her control. That's where the fire lives. Let's take a practical example. Imagine you're getting to know a woman and the connection is strong. Instead of rushing to lock it in, to claim her, to constantly reassure her, you stay present but slightly detached. You don't give everything away. You let her wonder, you show her you're interested, but you don't need her to be interested back. You're not leaning in. You're standing tall. What does that do? It forces her to lean in, to earn your attention, to invest emotionally. And once she invests, her attachment grows. Why? Because the mind becomes more attached to what it works for. When you withhold just enough, when your love feels earned, not given, you create psychological gravity. She becomes drawn into your world not because you chased her, but because you led her to chase you. There's a reason we value things that are exclusive, things that aren't easily accessible, things that hold a level of mystery. It's not just cultural, it's biological. The brain links effort to reward. The more a woman feels she has to engage emotionally to access you, the more rewarding the experience of connection becomes. You stop being just another option. You become the standard, the rare self-possessed man who doesn't need to prove his worth, because his very absence makes her feel your value. That's power. But again, don't fake this. Don't pretend to be scarce while secretly obsessing or acting out of fear. Real psychological influence comes from true emotional self-control, from knowing your worth so deeply that you don't need constant connection to validate it, from understanding that giving someone space to feel your absence is often the most potent way to make them feel your presence. So if you want to become irresistible, not for a moment, but in a way that rewires how she sees you, thinks about you, desires you, master the art of scarcity, be the man who could give everything, but doesn't. Be the man whose attention must be earned, not assumed. Be the man who makes his love feel exclusive, because it truly is. Let's talk about a kind of influence that doesn't come from speaking louder or showing off more. It's quiet, subtle, almost invisible on the surface. But it's one of the most psychologically potent ways to enter a woman's mind and stay there long after the conversation ends. It's the power of selective vulnerability, the ability to reveal only just enough of yourself to stir emotion, build connection, and spark a deep craving for more. You see, many men think vulnerability means emotional exposure, laying everything out, sharing their pain, their fears, their wounds. And while openness has its place, what most don't realize is that raw vulnerability, when given too quickly or in excess, can actually repel rather than attract. Why? Because vulnerability, when not balanced by strength, reads as instability. And instability doesn't build attraction. It creates emotional fatigue. But selective vulnerability, that's different. That's not weakness. It's control. It's choosing which parts of your inner world to reveal and when, in a way that makes her lean in instead of step back. It's about offering small glimpses into your emotional world that feel earned, not dumped. And that careful reveal, done at the right time with the right energy, creates a psychological and emotional tension that's deeply magnetic. Why? Because it shows depth, it shows dimension, it signals that there's more beneath the surface, but not all of it is accessible. And when something is only partially revealed, it activates a very specific part of the female psyche, curiosity. And where curiosity grows, desire follows. Now, there's a common misconception that women fall for the guy who's either the emotionally stoic alpha or the oversharing, sensitive, nice guy. But in reality, the men who are truly unforgettable, the ones women remember years later, are the ones who balance presence with mystery. They show strength in their composure, but occasionally, just occasionally, they drop the mask and offer something real. Something raw, and when that happens, it doesn't push her away. It pulls her in fast. But here's the key: you must be grounded first. Vulnerability without grounding feels like a burden, But when you're centered, when you're emotionally stable, revealing a personal truth makes you powerful. It makes you human, and more importantly, it creates contrast, because now you're not just the composed man. You're also the man with texture, with history, with scars that you've integrated, not hidden. This contrast is everything. It turns you from an image into a story, and women don't fall in love with images. They fall in love with stories, especially the ones they feel privileged to witness. When you open up in small, intentional ways, when you share a moment from your past, a turning point, a belief that shaped you, you're inviting her not into your drama, but into your evolution, and that's powerful, because what she really wants, what most people crave, is to feel like they are experiencing something rare, something not everyone gets to see. That's what builds emotional intimacy, not volume, but exclusivity. When she feels like you've shared something with her that you don't share with the world, she starts to believe she has a unique place in your life. And that belief, that perceived emotional access, that's what binds her to you. Selective vulnerability also signals self-trust. It says, I know who I am, I know what I've been through, and I'm not afraid to share it, but only with someone who earns that right. That kind of confidence is incredibly attractive. It shows that your emotional world is not wide open to just anyone. It's reserved, protected, not because you're hiding, but because you value it. And anything that's truly valuable must be protected. Now let's bring this full circle. If you've created emotional contrast, if you've mirrored her subconscious identity, if you've made your presence scarce and your validation earned, then selective vulnerability becomes the emotional glue that seals the bond. It confirms what she already suspects, but hasn't quite articulated, that there's something special about you, something she hasn't encountered before, and once that idea takes root, it's very hard to shake. When you reveal a carefully chosen truth, maybe a moment you failed but got back up, a time you were hurt but learned from it, a dream you held onto despite the odds, it creates resonance. She sees your strength through your struggle. She sees your capacity for connection without losing your boundaries. She feels safe, not because you've told her to trust you, but because you've shown her the emotional maturity that earns trust. And the best part, she'll never quite know when you'll open that door again. That unpredictability, the timing, the rhythm of your openness, it keeps her emotionally alert, engaged, wanting more. But none of this works if you're using vulnerability as a tactic. It has to come from awareness, not performance. Women can feel the difference when you're real, but refined. Your vulnerability becomes a tool of deep influence. It becomes a quiet signal that says, I'm strong enough to be open, but wise enough to choose who I open up to. So if you want to be unforgettable, not just attractive, not just liked, but truly unforgettable, don't overshare, don't emotionally flood, be intentional, be measured, be real in small, rare doses. Let her feel like she's been granted access to a deeper chamber of your soul, one that not everyone gets to see. Now let's shift into something most people ignore, yet it silently dictates the entire rhythm of romantic attraction. And that's nonverbal dominance, not dominance in the way pop culture distorts it. Not arrogance, not aggression, not control. I'm talking about the silent, deeply psychological authority that comes through your presence, not your words. The kind of power that's felt before you even speak. The kind that makes a woman instinctively tune in before you've said a single thing. Because here's the truth. Words are cheap. Everyone can say the right things. Compliments, jokes, even emotional declarations can be copied, rehearsed, recycled. But energy doesn't lie. It's the subtext, the tone, the posture, the way you take up space, not physically, but emotionally. And when your energy speaks louder than your words, you become unforgettable. The human mind is always scanning for subconscious signals, especially in social and romantic dynamics. Women, in particular, are highly sensitive to these cues. She might not consciously know why she feels more drawn to one man than another, even if the lesser a man looks better on paper. But her body, her intuition, her nervous system knows. Because she's reading something deeper, the way he moves, the way he holds eye contact, the way his presence changes the air in the room. That's what I mean by nonverbal dominance. It's not about being loud or overconfident. It's about stillness, certainty, control, you see. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself in restraint, in patience, in a man who knows he doesn't need to chase or compete or explain, because his energy already speaks for him. And women feel this deeply. When you speak slowly and with intent, you're signaling that you're not in a rush to prove yourself. When you hold strong eye contact, not aggressively, but calmly, you're saying, I'm present, I'm grounded, and I'm not intimidated by intimacy. When your body language is relaxed, open, unshaken, you're communicating one thing, emotional sovereignty, and that's attractive on a level no charm or pickup line can match. Why? Because nonverbal dominance creates emotional safety. And safety doesn't mean predictability. It means certainty within unpredictability. You can be mysterious. You can be selective with your words. You can keep her guessing. But if your energy is steady, if you're anchored within yourself, then she feels held by your presence, even in silence. And silence, by the way, is a weapon when used well. Most people rush to fill gaps in conversation because they're uncomfortable with stillness. But a man who's at peace with silence radiates authority. He doesn't chase emotional stimulation to feel alive. He is the calm in the room, and that stillness makes her lean in, listen harder, wonder more. Because when you're not always broadcasting, she starts asking questions. That curiosity builds psychological tension, and that tension, again, is where desire lives. Let's take it even deeper. Non-verbal dominance isn't just about outward behavior, it starts from within. You can't fake this. You can mimic posture or tone for a while, but if your inner state is anxious, insecure, or performative, it leaks out. The key is to cultivate true emotional command. That means being able to sit with your own discomfort. To remain composed when things don't go your way. To maintain your internal frame regardless of external noise. That's what she's reading. That's what impresses her on a level she can't articulate but absolutely feels. And this isn't about being stoic or robotic either. True presence has warmth, it has softness beneath the strength, but it's not needy, it's not seeking approval, it's offering connection without grasping. That's the balance, still but alive, quiet but intense, present but untouchable. And when you bring that energy into your interactions, when your silence says more than your words, when your gaze holds more weight than your compliments, when your mere presence calms the room, she doesn't just notice you. She feels you, and that feeling becomes memory. Memory becomes imprint, and imprint becomes attachment. This is why some men can say very little, but still be deeply desired. It's not what they say, it's the frequency they carry. It's the way they hold space, not just for her, but for themselves. It's emotional gravity, and once you become the source of that gravity, everything else, words, gestures, even touch becomes secondary. But here's the trap. Don't confuse non-verbal dominance with emotional coldness. This isn't about pulling away or being distant. It's about being deliberate, about knowing that less is more when that less is saturated with intention. When every glance, every pause, every slight shift in tone is done from a place of self-possession, it creates a dance of energy, and in that dance you lead without force, you influence without pressure, you captivate without chasing. So if you want to truly embody influence in a way that makes her remember you, not just like you, but feel something electric in your presence, forget the scripts, forget the gimmicks. Start with energy, start with stillness, learn to walk into a room without needing to be noticed, and you will be. Learn to hold her gaze without flinching, and she'll remember that look long after the conversation ends. Now let's step into something even deeper, something that governs the emotional landscape between two people, but is often completely misunderstood. It's not about strategy or control or even seduction in the typical sense. It's about emotional contrast in communication, not just how you speak, but what your presence communicates, even in silence. And specifically, your ability to switch between masculine containment and emotional openness in a way that disarms her defenses and anchors you into her emotional world. Because here's what most men miss. Women don't just respond to confidence or charm or well-placed words. They respond to emotional dynamics. They respond to the range a man brings. A man who's always soft, always agreeable, always emotionally available becomes flat, predictable, and textured. On the other hand, a man who is too hard, too cold, too controlled may seem powerful at first, but quickly becomes distant, intimidating, emotionally inaccessible. What women crave, whether consciously or not, is polarity. The dance between strength and softness, the interplay between emotional intensity and restraint, the light and the shadow. It's this polarity that makes her feel alive in your presence. And this contrast in how you show up emotionally, how you can transition between being the grounded, logical anchor one moment and the emotionally present, tuned-in listener the next, is what creates psychological attachment. It makes her feel like you contain both edges of the masculine spectrum, the warrior and the poet, the rock and the ocean, the grounded frame and the emotional mirror. And it's in that complexity that she finds depth. Safety, desire, let me explain this more clearly. Containment is the masculine ability to hold space without being reactive. It's when she's emotional, confused, upset, or even testing you, and you don't flinch. You don't fight her energy, you absorb it, not passively but intentionally. You hold your center not because you don't care, but because you're solid enough to handle it. And that kind of energy is rare. It creates trust in her nervous system. It says, he won't collapse when things get hard. I can bring my full self here. I'm safe. But what makes that containment even more potent is when it's followed, or strategically broken, with openness. A moment where your voice softens, where your eyes say more than your words, where you let her see the man behind the control. Maybe you admit something unexpected. Maybe you affirm her with such clarity that it cuts through her doubts. That moment, when you shift from containment into emotional presence, is electric. It floods her system with contrast. It tells her, this man is strong and tender, controlled and expressive. He leads, but he feels. And this is why emotional monotony, even in high-value men, is a silent attraction killer. When your emotional energy is always set to one note, whether stoic or overly expressive, you become readable. And the mind stops responding to what it can easily predict. But when you weave contrast into your emotional presence, when your voice knows when to command and when to soothe, when your gaze knows when to hold and when to release, when your touch knows when to lead and when to linger, you activate her subconscious. You invite her into an experience, not just a relationship. Because remember, women are not just looking for companionship. They're looking for experience, for emotional immersion, for the kind of relational depth that most men are too afraid or too unaware to offer. And the beauty is, it's not about being dramatic or overly complex. It's about being intentional. You're not leaking emotion, you're directing it. You're not trying to impress her, you're impacting her. Here's where it gets powerful. The more skilled you become at this emotional range, the contrast between firmness and softness, between distance and intimacy, the more influence you hold over her internal world. She starts to anticipate your shifts. She begins to feel your presence before she understands it. And this triggers one of the deepest forms of psychological bonding, emotional imprinting. You become the one man who doesn't just meet her expectations. You transcend them. You surprise her emotionally, and that surprise creates fascination. Fascination turns into attachment, and attachment, deep, emotionally anchored attachment, is the foundation of lasting desire, but this takes emotional maturity. You can't fake this with technique. You have to embody it. You need the self-awareness to recognize your emotional defaults, the discipline to restrain when necessary, and the courage to be seen when the moment calls for it. You must be willing to feel deeply without being consumed. That's where true masculine strength lies, not in shutting down emotion, but in navigating it without losing your footing. And that brings us to a higher truth, because all of this, at its core, is about presence. Your ability to be fully there, not scattered, not distracted, not performing, just present, alive, responsive, connected. A woman doesn't fall in love with perfection, she falls in love with attunement. She falls in love with how she feels in your presence, and when your presence carries contrast, when she feels held and challenged, seen and surprised, you don't just win her attention, you win her emotional devotion. So if you want to rise above the noise, above the predictable, the passive, the performative, learn this art of contrast, be the storm and the shelter, the fire and the calm, be the man whose energy makes her feel like she's not just talking to someone, but experiencing something.